The cheese was soft, the clue was hidden. The killer, bold enough to serve it warm. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Let's connect. Drop where you're watching from in the comments below. You all make this community something special. Let's begin. It was a Tuesday, which in our household translates to sweetbreads and silence until noon, Wolfe's rigid morning schedule being as adjustable as the marble in his orchid room. I had just come back from an errand that involved picking up a wheel of artisanal cheese from a French boutique on the Upper West Side. Why? Because Wolfe, in a burst of uncharacteristic enthusiasm, red boredom, had recently developed a flirtation with obscure dairy. Today's flavor was Brie with truffle veins and a rind that smelled like aristocracy gone sour. I carried the package in like it was crown jewels, dropped it on the kitchen counter for Fritz to fondle, and was halfway through removing my hat when the doorbell rang. Now, let me tell you, unannounced visitors are to the brownstone what garlic is to a soufflé. They ruin everything. I gave the clock a glance. 11:17 a.m., definitely within Wolfe's sacred do not disturb window. I considered ignoring it, but it rang again, this time in that impatient, entitled staccato reserved for people who think knocking louder compensates for bad timing. I opened the door halfway, enough to intimidate without welcoming. She was in her late 30s, dressed like Park Avenue money, but carried herself like she was used to issuing orders instead of asking for favors. Her coat was camel wool, double-breasted, and didn't flinch under the wind. She had the face of someone who hadn't smiled much lately, and the sort of poise that tells you she's holding something in, grief or a loaded pistol. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent. They always say that, I replied. I'm Archie Goodwin, and Wolfe's busy communing with silence and sour cheese, so unless someone's dying or you brought a subpoena, you're better off trying your luck around 1 o'clock. My name is Claire Vassal. My brother thinks I'm insane. I think someone tried to poison me with cheese. That got my attention. Not just the cheese angle, which was already suspiciously on brand, but the tone. She said it the way most people say someone stole my car or the waiter spit in my drink. Calm, unshaken, and dead serious. I stepped aside, motioned her in and led her to the front room, away from the kitchen, Fritz and Wolfe's eardrum radius. Poisoned cheese isn't our usual brand of mystery, I said, offering her the couch. Start at the beginning, and don't skip the part about why your brother thinks you're nuts. Claire didn't sit. She stood near the window, fingers tapping the side of her leather handbag like Morse code. My brother and I co-own Vassal Fine Imports. We specialize in French delicacies, cheese, wine, that sort of thing. He manages the books I curate, the product lines. We've had some heated arguments lately over inventory priorities. 3 nights ago, I opened a new case of Brie at our tasting room. Within the hour, I collapsed. Blurred vision, nausea, cold sweats. The ER couldn't find anything definitive, but I know something was in that cheese. It wasn't just bad fermentation. And your brother? He thinks I imagined it. Said I was overworked, dramatic. He called in a psychiatrist behind my back. Suggested early burnout. But I know what I felt. I asked a friend to have the cheese analyzed independently. It disappeared from the fridge the next morning. I raised an eyebrow. Disappeared as in misplaced, as in stolen. By someone who knew exactly what they were removing. I want Mr. Wolfe to find out who and why. I'd heard flimsier reasons to drag Wolfe out of his chair. But cheese? Sabotage wasn't usually enough to interrupt a man mid-hydrangea contemplation. Still, there was something off about her. The control, the calm, the friction between what she said and what she didn't. All right, I said, standing. I wait here. I'll go see if His Royal Roundness is willing to entertain dairy-based drama before lunch. I ascended the stairs to the plant room, found Wolfe precisely where he always was, brow furrowed, eyes half-lidded, and hands clasped. On his rotund belly, like a sleeping Buddha cursed with excellent vocabulary. She says someone tried to kill her with cheese, I offered flatly. His eyes didn't open. Is she imaginative or mad? Neither. Sharp, rich, and collected. Name's Claire Vassal, co-owner of a French import business. Her brother thinks she's paranoid. She thinks he or someone else tried to poison her. The offending Brie vanished before lab results could be run. Wolfe sighed as if the cosmos had personally inconvenienced him. Bring her up and inform. Fritz, that lunch may be delayed. That alone told me he was intrigued, not hooked but interested enough to bite. When Wolfe delays lunch, it means something has breached the gates. I went back down to escort our guest into the lion's den. She followed with measured steps, scanning everything like a field operative assessing a potential ambush. Wolfe didn't stand, of course. He observed her as she entered, the way a botanist studies a specimen, not rudely, but clinically. "Miss Vassal," he said, "your allegation is extraordinary. Your demeanor is not. Begin again from the start, with precision." And just like that, the brownstone had been breached. The air shifted. Something smelled suspicious, and for once it wasn't the cheese. Wolfe once told me that bringing emotional people into the brownstone was like uncorking vinegar near a soufflé, unwise, unpleasant, and almost always irreversible. So when Claire Vassal took the red chair across from him, legs crossed, spine stiff, and tone icily measured, I half expected him to lose interest before her second sentence. But something about her, maybe the way she withheld more than she offered, or the directness with which she accused someone of attempted murder over hors d'oeuvres, kept Wolfe from giving her the patented wave of dismissal. She'd repeated her story for him with fewer flourishes than I got, and more emphasis on the missing cheese. Wolfe asked 3 questions during the entire 15-minute spiel. One was about the exact type of Brie. The second was whether she had enemies outside her business. The third was whether she would allow him complete control over the investigation. When she nodded once, no drama, no disclaimers, he sat back in his chair and announced, "I will look into it." Now I've seen people respond to that line in 100 ways. Relief, gratitude, tears. Claire Vassal just gave him a faint nod and rose like she'd stood up from a chess match she intended to win later. Wolfe, without looking up, gestured to me. "Archie, get Mr. Vassal on the phone. Invite him to come here tomorrow at 11 and call Saul." Claire paused at the door. "You won't regret this, Mr. Wolfe." "I never do," he replied without blinking. After she left, Wolfe said nothing. He just sat there digesting her words like they were one of Fritz's heavier roasts. I could tell something had landed in the space between logic and suspicion, that tight groove Wolfe liked to occupy when things weren't adding up fast enough. I took that as my cue to head for the kitchen, where Fritz was standing near the counter, with the newly delivered truffle brie on a carved cheese board, untouched and still chilled. "She didn't bring this?" I asked. "No," Fritz said, furrowing his brow. "That was from Mousset Montagne. I picked it up this morning on Mr. Wolfe's list." "Why?" "Because apparently someone tried to kill a woman with cheese. Not this one, don't worry." "But a cousin, maybe." Fritz frowned deeper. "People waste good cheese every day, but to waste it that way, criminal." Back upstairs, Wolfe hadn't moved. I went straight to the office phone, dug up the Vassal Fine Imports number, and got Claire's brother on the line after 2 transfers and a clipped secretary. Paul Vassal speaking. "This is Archie Goodwin, assistant to Nero Wolfe. Your sister retained our services regarding a personal matter. Mr. Wolfe would like to meet with you at the brownstone tomorrow at 11 a.m. There was a pause, the kind you get when someone is trying to decide whether to laugh, yell, or hang up. She's dragging you into this cheese hallucination too. She's paying us to look into something she believes is more than a hallucination. I'll come, but only to prove she's lost it. I assume this is a professional courtesy, not an intervention. You can assume anything you like, just be on time." He hung up first. Wolfe, who had clearly been listening in his passive-aggressive way, said, "He will be defensive. Take note of that." Then came the kicker. Wolfe rang for me after dinner, an act of sacrilege unless something's actually on fire. When I arrived, he had an empty manila folder and a slip of paper with 4 names on it. Claire Vassal, Paul Vassal, Marcia Coyne, Dennis Iberra. Am I supposed to know any of these besides the siblings? No, that's your task. The first 2 you've met. The second 2 were named on the company's website under senior curators. I want details: education, career path, temperament, criminal records if any, and financial anomalies. Begin tomorrow. Use Saul as needed. Saul Panzer, if you're unfamiliar, is the kind of man who could find out what brand of socks you wore 3 years ago on a Tuesday during a blackout. If Wolfe was involving Saul this early, it meant he suspected layers. Maybe not death yet, but certainly deception. By the time the sun limped into the next day, the brownstone had shifted. You wouldn't notice it unless you lived there, but the air had that hum it gets when Wolfe smells manipulation. Fritz kept peeking toward the front hallway. The orchids were checked 3 times, and Wolfe asked me to remove the Brie from the kitchen and place it in his office for study, he said. Right. At 10:55 a.m., Paul Vassal arrived. Unlike his sister, he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was smooth enough to belong in a campaign ad. He wore a slim blue suit with no tie, top button unfastened, and a pocket square that screamed expensive but unoriginal. This place is vintage, he said, stepping inside. Like a museum, but for books and anxiety. You'll fit right. In, I replied, leading him into the office. Wolfe greeted him with the usual lack of warmth, motioned for him to sit, and didn't offer him anything, not even water. That's always a red flag. Hospitality from Wolfe means you're neutral. Indifference means you're being evaluated. Paul launched into his version of things with the energy of a man who'd told this story 100 times and wasn't about to deviate. Claire's been tense for months. We've had disagreements about brand focus, but it's normal sibling stuff. Ever since she moved back from Provence, she's been, well, more intense. She doesn't sleep. She's lost weight. And now she thinks a Brie is out to get her. Is it unusual, Wolfe cut in, for your sister to insist on testing food independently? No, but it's unusual for her to do it behind my back. Did you remove the sample she submitted? Paul blinked. What? The cheese, Wolfe said. The one she intended for testing, it vanished. Were you responsible? Paul narrowed his eyes. No. I didn't even know she'd done that. Wolfe didn't answer. He just stared at Paul the way a lizard stares at a sun lamp. I knew that look. It meant Wolfe was measuring his truth in centimeters, not inches. After Paul left, Wolfe turned to me. There is tension. Not merely business, but personal, and he resents her independence. So, do you think he did it? I think he knows more than he's saying, but no, I don't believe he poisoned her. Then who? That, Wolfe said, is what Saul will soon help determine. And just as he said that, the phone rang. I answered. Saul's voice came through calm as ever. I just finished speaking with Marcia Coyne, former sommelier, no criminal record, nervous on the phone. Claimed Claire's been erratic lately, but admitted there's jealousy. Claire took over the flagship store last year, bumping her down. Iberra's harder, doesn't answer. I'm going by his apartment next. Wolfe nodded slightly when I relayed that. Then he said something that pulled the whole room an inch tighter. There is no such thing as accidental betrayal in business. There is only delayed opportunity. That was his version of an omen. Something inside the brownstone had shifted. The visitors, the suspicions, the cheese, all of it had crept under Wolfe's skin. And I had a feeling this was going to spoil more than just our appetite. By Thursday morning, the suspects had begun to take shape, not with dramatic confessions or bodies in the basement, but through the quieter things Wolfe respects most: resentment, contradiction, and carefully disguised ambition. I spent the better part of that morning with my phone to my ear, my shoes on the pavement, and my instincts tuned to detect the difference between personality quirks and the kind of motive you can spread with a butter knife. First on my list was Marcia Coyne, the ex-sommelier turned curator. She agreed to meet me at a cafe in Soho that sold things with names I couldn't pronounce and prices I didn't want to validate. Marcia showed up 15 minutes late and didn't apologize. She was lean and sharp-faced, dressed in black from neck to heel with a burgundy scarf like a slash across her throat. If she hadn't told me she worked with cheese and wine, I'd have pegged her for a stage actress between gigs. Claire's overdramatic, she said, before the coffee had even cooled. Always has been. She used to cry over cracked wheels of Comté. Yeah? Well, this time it wasn't just cracked cheese. She ended up in the hospital. Marcia sipped her drink like it offended her. She fainted. That's not exactly attempted murder. And now she's dragging your Mr. Wolfe into it? Honestly, that's what's making me suspicious. Of what? Of her. This kind of chaos is convenient when you want to deflect attention. Maybe she made a bad business call and wants to distract from it. Or maybe she's trying to frame someone. My name, perhaps. I gave her a look. Why would she frame? Are you? Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. Because she resents me. I trained her when she came back from France. I carried the tasting room while she was gallivanting in truffle markets, and then Paul promoted her over me. So yes, maybe she thinks I'm bitter enough to do something stupid. And are you? She didn't flinch. No. I prefer my sabotage. To be subtle and career-based, not criminal. I'm a professional. Which translated from corporate backstabberies meant I didn't do it, but I'm not heartbroken someone did. I thanked her, paid for the coffee she didn't finish, and headed to stop number 2, Dennis Ibarra. Now, Dennis wasn't as easy to pin down. Saul hadn't been able to reach him the day before, and his work hours at the Vassal warehouse were sporadic. I finally tracked him to a Brooklyn loft that looked like it had seen better tenants and worse plumbing. He answered the door in a tank top and cargo pants, eyes bleary like I'd woken him from a nap he didn't want to admit to. "You're Claire's detective guy?" he asked, rubbing his face. "Something like that. Archie Goodwin. I'm trying to get a handle on what happened at the tasting room last week. Mind if I come in?" He hesitated just long enough to register as suspicious, then waved me in. The apartment smelled like gym socks and instant ramen. A gaming console blinked in the corner. The guy was 30, tops, and clearly not thrilled about me poking around his involvement with fermented cow's milk. "Claire said she got sick from a Brie sample," I began. "You were working the same night?" "Yeah." I set up the display. "But I didn't touch the stuff. I don't eat cheese. Lactose intolerance swells me up like a balloon." Then who prepped the Brie she tasted? Marcia handled it. I brought the tray out, but she plated it herself. I just dropped off the box when it arrived and went back to organizing stock. "Do you remember anything strange about the delivery? Wrong label, weird packaging?" He shrugged. "It looked fine, same distributor, same barcode format. If it was tampered with, it wasn't obvious." That matched what Wolfe suspected. Subtle tampering, not sloppy sabotage. But something about Dennis didn't sit right. He was nervous, too eager to be helpful, but only about safe topics. "You get along with Claire?" "She's intense. Takes the brand seriously. Wants every wheel of cheese to tell a story." "Do you?" he laughed. "I think cheese should be cheese. Eat it. Move on. That whole poetic angle? That's not me." That much was clear, but what stuck with me was the way his fingers twitched whenever I mentioned Claire. He wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of being associated with her. Or maybe of something else. Back at the brownstone, I reported to Wolfe while he was midway through a plate of Fritz's veal and greens. He listened, nodded, and didn't interrupt until I got to the bit about Dennis and the Brie prep. He claims. "Not to eat cheese," I said. "Says he's lactose intolerant." "That may be true," Wolfe replied, dabbing his lips, "but intolerance does not preclude handling. And handling is the crime's mechanism, not consumption." "Marcia prepped the plate," I added. "But Dennis moved the box. If something was added, it could have occurred at either stage. You are to obtain a list of employees with access to incoming shipments. And I want the name of the distributor. We shall verify whether the Brie in question was substituted before arrival. Want me to call Inspector Kramer?" Wolfe's lip twitched. "Not yet. This is still an internal matter. And Kramer's contempt is best reserved for higher stakes than spoiled dairy." That night, Saul came by with a quiet knock and a folder tucked under his arm. Wolfe didn't stand to greet him, of course, but did arch an eyebrow when Saul laid the contents out like evidence in a courtroom. "Ibarra had a DUI 2 years ago," Saul said. "Nothing violent, but it cost him his last job. Claire gave him a second chance. No priors for coin, but Paul Vassal has been siphoning funds. Small amounts over several months, likely unnoticed until now. Also, the distributor who handled the Brie delivery was changed 3 days before the event. Claire filed the change herself. That last part made Wolfe inhale slightly. A rarity. "She requested the distributor switch?" "Yes," says she. "Was testing a new supplier from Loire. But there's no documentation about the rationale, and this supplier has no history with the company." Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. "So the Brie was new. The handler was an employee with a record, and the victim arranged the delivery herself." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So what does that mean? She set herself up. It means, Wolfe said, that we are no longer investigating a simple act of sabotage. We are confronting a possibility more insidious, that the victim chose the stage and may have written the script. Now that was a theory I hadn't considered. Claire, staging her own fainting spell to trigger chaos in the company. Or maybe to bait someone? Wolfe's wheels were turning faster than usual, and when that happens, it's best not to interrupt. Tomorrow, he said, we will invite all parties to the brownstone. But not at once, one at a time. First Paul, then Marcia, then Dennis, and finally Claire. You think she's playing us? I think she is playing someone. Whether us or them remains to be seen. That night, the brownstone was unusually quiet. No orchid questions, no gripes about Fritz's seasoning. Wolfe didn't even demand his beer be chilled to precisely 38 degrees, because something had changed. We no longer had a circle of suspects, we had a stage, and someone, maybe the accuser, maybe the accused, was directing the play. If there's one thing you learn working for Nero Wolfe, it's this: people lie faster than they blink and cover their tracks like it's an Olympic sport. That's where I come in. Wolfe might move only between his office and his orchid room, but I get to dance through the city chasing contradictions, half-truths and accidental tells like a guy stuck in a card game where everyone cheats and nobody knows the rules. The day after Wolfe's chessboard comment, I hit the streets with one goal: find out what happened in the 72 hours before Claire Vassal collapsed over a wheel of Brie that may or may not have been spiked with more than truffles. Wolfe suspected the play had started well before she fainted, and that meant the answer wasn't going to be found in a lab, but in the small cracks between what people did and what they claimed they did. First stop, Vassal Fine Imports, the Manhattan flagship. It was sleek and tasteful, with dark wood shelving, refrigerated glass cases glowing with overpriced dairy, and quiet employees who looked like they'd been trained to treat cheese like ancient art. The receptionist recognized me from the day before and made a face like I was back to audit her soul. I asked to see shipping logs for the week of the tasting event. She squirmed but relented, probably because I mentioned Wolfe's name like it was a court order. The delivery roster showed a shipment from Fromagerie Loire et Miel, a small French supplier with no prior record in the company's books. According to the log, Claire had authorized the change on September 9th, 3 days before the event. Interesting. According to Saul, she hadn't told Paul about the switch. And Marcia, who usually handled supplier relations, had no idea either, which meant Claire had made that call alone and quietly. That was either bold confidence or carefully planned setup. I photographed the logs and asked the receptionist if she knew when the delivery had physically arrived. She checked the records. Morning of the 12th, she said. 9:37 a.m. Who signed for it? Dennis Ibarra. I nodded. So Dennis had handled the box before anyone else, including Marcia. That made him the only person to touch the Brie. Before it was unwrapped, that sent me straight to Saul's guy at the food inspection office. After a little professional elbow grease and the promise of a decent bottle of scotch, he confirmed that Fromagerie Loire et Miel wasn't technically licensed to export to the US. They were on a list of grey market suppliers, quality. Product, sure, but shady paperwork and zero accountability, which meant Claire had brought in cheese from an off-the-book supplier, gotten sick after eating it, and now was claiming someone else tampered with it. She either walked into a trap or laid one herself. I called Wolfe from a payphone 2 blocks from the warehouse. She ordered the shipment herself. Dennis signed for it. The suppliers on the government's, maybe not lethal, but not legal, list. Wolfe grunted into the receiver. Did she know the risks? Hard to say, she's not stupid. She might have taken the gamble because she trusted the product. Or, Wolfe murmured, because she didn't intend to consume it. That stopped me cold. You think she didn't actually plan to eat it? It's possible. But she did eat it, which means either someone switched the wheel after delivery or the original plan faltered. I hung up and headed to my next target, the guy who delivered the cheese. According to the logbook, the courier worked for a third party. Local shipper called Brisk Freight. One phone call got me the delivery driver's name, Miles Drayton. and another 2 hours of tailing got me to his parking spot outside a deli in Queens. He was in his early 40s, looked like he'd been delivering things since the Stone Age, and had the kind of no-nonsense face that belonged on a Union poster. "I remember the Vassal delivery," he said when I caught him between drop-offs. "Small crate, cold-packed, nothing unusual, signed for by a skinny guy in cargo pants. Denis Ibera? Sounds right. Didn't give me any trouble. But I did notice something weird. Talk to me." When I pulled up, a black Lexus was already idling by the side entrance. Didn't think much of it, figured it was another delivery or client. But when I came out after drop-off, it was gone. No logo, no tags. Just sitting there like it was watching the place. That didn't sit right. Vassal's warehouse wasn't on a high-traffic street. A parked car like that could mean surveillance, or an outside player. I reported back to Wolfe with everything. He listened with his eyes half closed and fingers steepled, like he was listening to a symphony only he could hear. Claire arranged the supplier. Dennis signed for the box. Marcia plated the cheese, and a mysterious car was parked outside during delivery. Where does that leave us? Wolfe opened his eyes. In a theater with too many playwrights and no script. Saul arrived late that afternoon with more info. Dennis, he'd discovered, had recently opened a private savings account. Cash-only deposits, irregular but frequent. Nothing illegal, just cautious, as if he didn't want the money tracked. And Marcia? She had an upcoming interview with a rival import company, the kind of firm that wouldn't mind insider knowledge of Vassal's clientele. When I mentioned this to Claire, who'd come by uninvited later that evening to check in, her reaction was interesting. She barely blinked at the news about Marcia, but when I mentioned Dennis's secret account, her mouth tightened. "I gave him a second chance," she said. "That's how he thanks me?" "Do you think he poisoned the cheese?" "I think he's weak," she said, "and that makes him dangerous." Later, Wolfe summoned me to the office again. The Brie sample sat untouched on his desk, and the room smelled faintly of herbs and something musty, probably betrayal. "We will summon them," Wolfe said. "All of them, one by one, tomorrow starting at noon. And what are we doing tonight?" He looked at me like I'd asked whether water was wet. "Tonight, Mr. Goodwin, we are letting them stew. Guilt ripens under silence more than interrogation," which was Wolfe's way of saying, sometimes the best bait is stillness. You stop moving. You stop asking, you wait. And when the truth wants out, it'll knock on your door without needing an invitation. By the time the clock struck 11 the next morning, the brownstone was locked into its typical pre-confrontation silence. Wolfe sat in his chair like a man waiting for a comet, silent and unmoved, while I paced the front room, double-checking appointment times, sharpening pencils, and trying not to think about how quiet things had been overnight. Too quiet, in fact. It wasn't until I went to retrieve the file Wolfe had asked me to prepare, a compilation of everything from shipping logs to staff bios, that I noticed it. The file cabinet in the hallway wasn't locked. That wasn't unusual by itself, since Wolfe didn't bother with locks unless it involved beer, books, or orchids. But what was unusual was the gap in the drawer. One file was half a centimeter out of place, as if it had been pulled and shoved back in a rush. Wolfe's office files were arranged like a Swiss watch. If one document was a hair out of place, he'd spot it before his first sip of beer. I pulled out the folder. It was the courier delivery records, not our notes, just the original photocopies, of the signature logs and timestamps. Nothing was missing, but the fingerprints on the plastic sleeve were fresh. I checked the others. Clean. Someone had handled this file. Recently, I carried it into the office and placed it on Wolfe's desk, without a word. He looked at it, looked at me, and gave the faintest twitch of his left eyebrow. "Someone's been poking through our drawers," I said. "And it wasn't me." Wolfe didn't respond right away. He closed his eyes and leaned back. Describe. Drawer was half an inch off. Only this file had new prints, delivery logs. Someone came in, took a look, put it back. He opened his eyes. Was anything altered? It's not that I can tell, but they were looking for something. Wolfe's mouth formed a thin line. It appears our theater has acquired a backstage trespasser. We didn't have to guess who had access. The brownstone wasn't Grand Central. Station. Aside from me, Fritz, Wolfe, and the occasional orchid vendor, the only people who had been inside in the last 48 hours were Claire and Paul Vassal. Neither had been left unattended long, but Claire had visited alone yesterday, uninvited, and I had stepped out to take a call halfway through her visit. Wolfe didn't jump to conclusions. He never does. He simply ordered Fritz to verify whether any office drawers were left open. Fritz confirmed the cabinet was closed when he passed through, but he hadn't touched it since the day before. That narrowed the tampering to one window. Yesterday afternoon during Claire's solo visit. I didn't see her go near it, I said. You also didn't see her not go near it, Wolfe replied. He sat silent for a while, staring at the Brie on his desk as if it might confess. Then he muttered, "Bring in Paul early." I made the call. Paul showed up half an hour later, wearing another expensive suit and that same rehearsed smile. Wolfe wasted no time. "You have a key to your sister's office?" Paul blinked. Of course, why? Was there ever a time you accessed files without informing her? I'm the financial officer, I access what I please. And your sister's taste logs? He frowned. What do you mean? Records of what was served at tastings, especially on the 12th. Paul folded his arms. I didn't touch those. Why would I? That, Wolfe said, is the question. You may go. Paul left, more annoyed than unsettled, which Wolfe found revealing. He stared at the door after it closed. He's either clean, Wolfe said, or confident enough to bluff. At noon sharp, Claire arrived. She looked different, tense around. The eyes blouse too crisp. She sat stiffly and waited. Wolfe wasted no time with pleasantries. You came yesterday? Yes. You asked about Marcia and Dennis? Yes. Did you touch anything in the hallway while I was out of the room? Her eyes didn't flinch, but her hands froze on her purse. No, someone did. She hesitated. What would I have been looking for? That's not an answer. She straightened. I didn't touch your files. I don't need to sneak around. Wolfe stared at her for a long moment. Unless, he said softly, you were checking to see what we had figured out. Her jaw clenched. That's ridiculous. Wolfe said nothing more. She left shortly after, rigid as a marble statue. It was nearly 1 when Marcia arrived, still wrapped in black and wearing disinterest-like cologne. Wolfe let her sit for 5 minutes before speaking. Do you know of any conflict between Dennis and Claire? Marcia gave a short, dry laugh. Dennis owes Claire his job. He's grateful and terrified of her, probably in equal parts. Would he protect her? Marcia blinked. What? If Claire had done something reckless, say, import from a banned supplier, would Dennis shield her? He might. He looks up to her. Wolfe said nothing. She waited for a follow-up. There was none. She left 10 minutes later. Then came Dennis. He shuffled in like he was visiting a dentist, not a detective. Nervous, damp palms, bad posture, the whole set. Wolfe didn't even look up from his desk. You signed for the delivery from Loire et Miel. Yes. You opened the box? No. I just carried it into the cold room. Who did open it? Marcia. Always Marcia. She preps everything. And the Brie was... Fine? Dennis shifted. It looked fine. You're sure? I didn't taste it. I can't. That's not what I asked. Dennis went quiet. Wolfe waited. Dennis blinked hard, then looked at me like I'd offer rescue. Something was off, he finally said. The rind was crumbly. It looked older than it should have been. I told Marcia. She waved me off. Wolfe didn't react. You didn't mention this before. I didn't think it mattered. It does, Wolfe said. That will be all. Dennis practically ran out the door. After the last suspect left, Wolfe turned to me. One of them returned here, yesterday, someone who knew exactly where that file was, and what they needed to confirm. You think they weren't trying to destroy anything, just checking our intel? Yes, because something is unraveling, and they wanted to know if we'd caught the thread. I leaned forward. So what do we do now? We escalate. He picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't heard in a while. Mr. Panzer, please visit the Vassal offices tonight. I want the original supplier emails. Dig them up. And if you encounter resistance, find a way around it. Wolfe hung up and looked at me. This was never about poisoning, it was about leverage. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of leverage? The kind that sours even the ripest cheese, Wolfe said, and with that he rang for beer, which meant we were officially entering stage 2. The trespasser had made a move. Now Wolfe would return the favor, with precision. Wolfe doesn't believe in coincidences. If something goes missing, someone made it disappear. If someone lies, they're hiding more than pride. And if someone sneaks into his house to rifle through his files, well, that's not just insult, that's war. By the next morning, the brownstone felt like it was holding its breath. Fritz kept glancing at the front door like he expected it to burst open. Wolfe barely touched his breakfast, which in his world is just shy of cardiac arrest. And me? I spent the morning staring at the file cabinet, trying to figure out what exactly the trespasser had hoped to learn. Wolfe suspected it was confirmation. Of what? He hadn't yet said. But if someone was desperate enough to double-check our evidence, then something we had must have been pointed right at them. At 10:03 a.m., Saul arrived, trench coat damp from rain, hair barely moved. He handed Wolfe a brown folder, thicker than the last batch, and didn't sit. I went in through the IT guy, he said. Told him I was auditing Claire's imports. He didn't ask for proof, just offered coffee. Vassal's internal systems are a mess. No password changes in 2 years. Wolfe opened the folder slowly, like it might explode. What did you find? Claire's email to Loire et Miel was direct. She requested a Brie shipment, specifically from the aged selection batch. That's not standard. It's code. They don't have anything labeled that way publicly. She attached a separate invoice off record and CC'd no one. She knew exactly what she was bringing in and wanted no one else to see it. Wolfe nodded slightly. So she sourced a questionable cheese alone and then consumed it at an open tasting. Not just consumed, Saul said. Featured. She had flyers made. Imported rare Brie, 1 night only. Her event was the bait. She wanted attention. Wolfe gestured for Saul to go on. Here's the kicker, Saul continued. She also emailed Marcia 3 days earlier, told her not to question the Brie's appearance or smell, said it was part of the authentic rustic profile. That phrase made Wolfe close his eyes. She planted the cheese, he said softly. Knowing it was suspicious, and preemptively neutralized the only other person likely to raise a flag. I glanced at Saul. So what's the angle? Self-sabotage? Or stagecraft, Saul said. You fake a crisis, you get sympathy, or you create a distraction. Wolfe tapped the folder. This is pressure. She invited the storm, but why? It was a good question. Claire didn't strike me as someone who needed pity. If anything, she wore strength like armor. But there was something else here. Something deeper than a corporate dispute or a bruised ego. Then Fritz appeared in the doorway, face pale. That's rare enough to signal a 4-alarm fire. There's a man at the door, he said. He claims someone's been watching the brownstone. Wolfe blinked. I moved fast, down the steps, across the foyer, and out the door. The guy was in his late 50s, windbreaker zipped to the chin, hat pulled low. He looked like a man with secrets, but not enough time to carry them all. You're Goodwin? He asked. Depends. Who's asking? Name's Gerald Lenz. I work security 2 doors down. I've seen a car parked outside your place for the last 3 nights. Same time, engine running, lights off. What kind of car? Black Lexus, tinted windows, no plates. That matched the vehicle the cheese courier saw at the warehouse. You catch a face? He shook his head. Too dark. But they weren't reading a book, just staring at your place. First night I figured Uber, waiting for a fare. But 3 nights. In a row, someone's watching you. I took his number, thanked him, and went back inside. Wolfe had already resumed his throne. He's telling the truth, I said. Same car seen at the warehouse. That means someone's following the case, and possibly following us. Wolfe closed his eyes again. That meant the pieces were moving, but not yet falling into place. Call Mr. Vassal, he said. Tell him to come here at 6. Do not tell him who else is coming. Then call Miss Coyne, 5:30. Private interviews. No, a gathering. 1 hour staggered. They will overlap, briefly. You think someone will break? I think someone already has. I made the calls. Paul confirmed without fuss. Marcia hesitated, then agreed, her tone clipped. Dennis didn't answer, so I left a message. Claire I called last. I need you at the brownstone at 6:30, I said. Why? Wolfe's orders. Who else will be there? You'll see. She hung up without saying goodbye. Either she was done pretending to be polite, or she knew what was coming. That afternoon, Wolfe instructed me to prepare the office. No snacks, no tea, no distractions, just 4 chairs arranged in a semicircle, facing him. At 5:30, Marcia arrived first, early for once. She took the seat farthest from Wolfe, crossed her legs, and stared at the orchids like they might confess. At 6 sharp, Paul entered. He offered a stiff nod to Marcia and sat without a word. Claire followed at 6:22, just early enough to see her brother and Marcia together, but not so early she'd be forced to chat. Dennis showed up dead last, hair wet from rain, eyes darting, like he expected to be arrested on the spot. Wolfe waited until all 4 were seated, then he exhaled. You are here because the matter has outgrown private inquiry, he said. You are all suspects in a deception. Not murder, not theft, but something more insidious, manipulation. Someone orchestrated an incident to shift power, control perception, or both, Paul scoffed. This again? Claire fainted. That's it. No, Wolfe said. Claire staged a spectacle. She imported questionable product, instructed her staff to ignore its signs of spoilage, and positioned herself at the center of an avoidable crisis. The question is, did she intend to harm herself or expose someone else? Silence. Claire leaned forward. I had a reason. I presume, Wolfe said. But reason does not exonerate. You misled your staff. You risked your safety. Why? Claire looked at Dennis, then Marcia, then her brother. I knew someone was leaking our supplier contacts. We lost 3 exclusivity deals in 2 months. I suspected Marcia or Dennis, so I set a trap. The Brie wasn't poisoned. It was mold-aged, harmless, but I made it look suspicious. If someone reacted, if someone tried to spin it, I'd know. Wolfe nodded. And someone did. Claire turned to Dennis. I saw you in the tasting room before the event, near the tray. You told Marcia it looked old. Then you disappeared for 15 minutes. Dennis's face blanched. I didn't touch it. You panicked, Wolfe said. You thought it was real. You tried to protect yourself, but in doing so you exposed yourself. I swear, it doesn't matter, Wolfe interrupted. Claire baited the hook. You bit. Claire stood. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. I just wanted to know who I could trust. And now you do, Wolfe said. The room went quiet. No. One spoke. Then Wolfe turned to me. Show them out. And that was that. Not a trial, not a victory lap. Just the truth. Unpacked, named, and folded away. As they left, Marcia tight-lipped, Paul fuming, Dennis pale, Claire paused at the door. Thank you. Wolfe didn't respond. He just reached for his beer, because the pressure was over, and the brownstone once again was quiet. By the next morning, the fog had lifted, figuratively, not literally. Outside, Manhattan still wore its best shade of gray, but inside the brownstone, Wolfe was sharper than he'd been all week. That's how you could tell when a case was approaching its center. He stopped muttering about orchids, didn't ask for his beer temperature twice, and only read the paper halfway through. That meant his mind was elsewhere, deep in one of those invisible structures he built whenever the human condition had tangled itself into a puzzle of layered motives and backdoor plays. The previous night's gathering had cracked the ice. Claire had confessed to staging the Brie incident, not to draw pity, but to bait a suspected leak. And Dennis, poor guy, had panicked just enough to confirm her suspicions, if not with a confession, then with his silence and sweat. But Wolfe wasn't celebrating. Because something about the whole scene, the timing, the reactions, the missing file incident, still didn't sit right with him. And if Wolfe didn't sit right with something, he didn't move until he got it realigned. He sat in his chair, hands steepled, staring at the Brie like it owed him rent. She planned the tasting, he said slowly, and invited Betrayal to meet her at the table. I nodded. And she got it. Dennis folded like a paper napkin. But that wasn't the only play. Wolfe stood up. Not much, just a shift of his posture, enough to lean forward an inch. For Wolfe, that's equivalent to someone else leaping on a table and yelling, Eureka! She suspected betrayal, he said. But she also staged a crisis large enough to damage the company. That is not mere suspicion. That is a gamble. With collateral, you think there's another motive? There always is, and that's when he laid it out, not in full, not yet, but just enough to get me moving again. Contact the supplier, he said. Not Loire et Miel. The previous. One. The trusted one. Find out why Claire dropped them. I didn't waste time. An hour later, I was on the line with a woman named Brigitte Rousseau, the export coordinator for Fromagerie Roux, a high-end French supplier that had worked with Vassal Imports for almost 5 years. Claire Vassal cancelled our contract without notice, Brigitte said. No explanation, just a short email. We were surprised, especially since she had personally visited our facility 2 months earlier and spoken positively. Was the account in good standing? Very. We never missed a delivery. Did anyone else contact you from the company? No, only Claire. Interesting. I hung up and called Saul. I want you to run something. Look into the competitors. Has anyone made a move to scoop up Roux? Give me an hour, Saul said. While I waited, Wolfe sat silently in his chair, fingers twitching near his lips the way they do when he's chewing on something heavy. Then he asked a question out of nowhere. What would you do, Archie, if you wanted to break a long-standing supplier contract without causing suspicion? I thought about it. Create a reason. Say the product was unreliable. Claim spoilage. Fake a reaction. Wolfe nodded once. And if you wanted to negotiate with a rival supplier without legal baggage from your current one, get the old one discredited. Precisely. That's when the dominoes started falling in my mind. Claire didn't just stage a health scare to catch a mole. She may have created a scandal to bury an old supplier and free herself for a new deal. The entire poisoning drama wasn't a reaction to betrayal. It was a tool, an excuse to shift the entire company's logistics without a whisper of internal resistance. Saul called back 30 minutes later. You were right, he said. Claire submitted a preliminary deal to Elance Imports. They're Roux's biggest competitor. The papers aren't signed yet, but the language is there. Exclusive rights, phased rollouts, branding control. It's aggressive. Wolfe's eyes didn't blink. And when did this begin? Draft date is the day after the tasting incident. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. She played the company, not just the staff, everyone. She used the incident to make the supplier switch look necessary, and blamed sabotage to give it cover. Wolfe finally leaned back, satisfied. She staged a crime, Archie. But not a legal one, a corporate one. And Dennis? Collateral, a useful diversion. She knew he'd look guilty if he panicked, and he did. What about the missing file in the hallway? You still think she came back for it? Wolfe shook his head. No, that wasn't Claire. That was Paul. I blinked. Her brother. Yes. He didn't want us to find that email. He knew what Claire was doing, but he wasn't in on it. He tried to verify if we had evidence. And now? Now, we call them back. I groaned. Another round? No, Wolfe said. Just one. Claire. She arrived later that afternoon, wearing her usual composure like Kevlar. She didn't sit this time. Wolfe didn't offer her the chance. You manipulated your company, he said. You staged an incident, faked a reaction, and used that narrative to cut ties with your French supplier without alerting shareholders. Claire didn't deny it. She didn't flinch. They were stifling us, she said. Too rigid, too slow. We were losing ground to Elance, and my brother wouldn't budge. He was married to Roux, so I forced his hand. By manufacturing a reason, Wolfe said. I didn't poison myself. I knew the cheese would make me sick temporarily. That was the point. It had to look real. Your brother could sue you, Wolfe said. The board could remove you. They won't, she said, because sales will spike. Elance is already shipping. The tasting room reopened today. The press is calling me brave. Wolfe said nothing. Just stared at her. She shifted. You're not going to expose me? No, Wolfe said. You've committed no crime, only deceit, and deceit is not illegal. She let out a breath, but Wolfe wasn't done. You gambled and won, but the cost is still yours. She nodded. I can live with that. She left, and Wolfe turned to me with a look that meant the case was closed. Sometimes, he said, truth is less satisfying than clarity, but clarity must suffice. And just like that, the positioning was done. Claire had played her hand, and Wolfe, as always, had watched it unfold without lifting a finger. There's a certain tension that takes over the brownstone when all the suspects are called in at once. Wolfe doesn't do it often. He prefers one-on-one breakdowns where his voice alone can trap someone in their own contradictions. But when he calls an office gathering, it means he's not just solving the problem, he's planning to air it out, slice by slice, with every player present to watch the pie fall apart. I got the calls out that morning, Paul confirmed cautiously. Marcia asked if Claire would be present and didn't sound thrilled when I said yes. Dennis stammered his way into an agreement. Claire didn't ask any questions. That told me she already knew what kind of stage Wolfe was setting and wasn't afraid to show up for the performance. Wolfe ordered the office arranged precisely. 4 chairs, evenly spaced, no refreshments, no distractions. The Brie sample, still untouched in its glass container, sat off to the side like an exhibit in a museum no one wanted to visit. Wolfe himself didn't move an inch. He hadn't gone to the plant rooms all day, hadn't cracked a book, hadn't requested beer. He just sat there thinking, and when Wolfe thinks like that, you don't interrupt. You just wait until he moves, because once he moves, everything else will too. At exactly 5 minutes before 6, Fritz opened the front door. Paul was first, followed by Dennis, then Marcia, and finally Claire. They entered in silence, exchanged nods like opposing legal teams before a verdict, and took their assigned chairs. No one spoke, not even a cough. Wolfe broke the silence with a sentence that hit like a slap. This was never about cheese. That made them blink, almost in unison. He waited a moment before continuing. The incident last week at the Vassal tasting room was not a crime of violence but of strategy. Someone faked a crisis. Someone used fear of poisoning, fear of sabotage, to obscure the real objective, leverage. That someone is in this room. Paul leaned forward. You can't be serious. My sister collapsed. I saw her. The hospital reports indicate temporary illness, Wolfe said. No toxic agents, no confirmed poisoning. Only circumstantial distress and a suspiciously timed disappearance of the cheese in question. A cheese Claire Vassal imported without notifying anyone, from a supplier with no previous relationship to the company, and one Claire had full authority to switch to. Claire didn't blink. She sat composed, one leg crossed, hands folded neatly. Marcia tilted her head. Are you saying she did this to herself? I am saying, Wolfe said, that she orchestrated the conditions. The Brie was not tampered with by a saboteur. It was simply questionable product, selected precisely for its appearance and its risk. Claire created a scenario in which she would be the victim in order to control the outcome. Paul scoffed. Why would she do that? That's absurd. Because she needed justification to sever ties with her former supplier, Fromagerie Roux, without board interference, Wolfe replied. And she needed to cement her shift toward Elance Imports, a rival with whom she was already negotiating. That landed hard. Even Marcia's breath caught slightly. Wolfe pressed on. This wasn't about health. It was about dominance. Claire created a scare that discredited the old supplier, distracted internal suspicions, and painted her as a figure under attack. In one move, she eliminated board resistance, exposed a suspected leak, and reframed the company's direction under her control. Dennis's head dropped. I didn't do anything, he mumbled. You didn't need to, Wolfe said. Hayo simply looked guilty. Claire suspected someone in the company had been leaking supplier details. You, with your private savings account and poor history, were perfect as a smokescreen. She knew you would panic under scrutiny. She planned for it, Claire finally spoke. I didn't harm anyone. No, Wolfe said. But you manipulated everyone. You lied to your staff, baited your brother, and positioned your company into a corner only you could lead them out of. It was calculated, impressive, and unethical. Paul stood. You knew? He asked her. You used me. I had to, she said. You wouldn't listen. Roux was outdated and we were dying in slow motion. The board was frozen. You were frozen. I made a choice. You framed me, Dennis said, voice rising. You made me look like a criminal. I didn't frame you, Claire replied, unshaken. I simply let you reveal yourself. Marcia leaned back, arms folded. And what about me? Did I serve as the audience or the distraction? You were always an audience, Marcia, Claire said, a little too calmly. Until you weren't. You were talking to rivals. Don't pretend you were just pouring wine. Wolfe raised a hand. The room fell silent. I am not the board, he said. I am not a judge. I am simply the observer who saw what you hid. This case is closed, but the consequences are yours to manage. No one replied. Paul left first, stiff-backed and silent. Marcia followed, chin high, avoiding eye contact. Dennis walked out with slumped shoulders and no words. Claire remained a moment longer. You won't tell the press, she asked. Why would I? Wolfe said. You already gave them the version they prefer. She nodded once, turned and left. The brownstone closed its doors. Wolfe didn't say another word for an hour. I poured him a beer. He didn't touch it. Just sat there, arms folded, eyes closed. Finally he spoke. She didn't break the law, but she broke something else. Trust, I said. No, he murmured. Balance. And that is far harder to restore. Then he rang for Fritz. Dinner was late, but order slowly had returned. By the next morning, everything should have been over. The case had played itself out in Wolfe's office like a one-act tragedy, betrayal without blood, ambition without arrest. The facts were in. Claire had engineered her own collapse with precision and purpose. Everyone else, Paul, Marcia, Dennis, had just danced to her tune, whether they knew it or not. But Wolfe wasn't done. Not quite, because what Wolfe calls the reveal isn't just an unveiling of events. It's a realignment of meaning. And until he's tied every knot and sealed every seam, he doesn't exhale. The day started with silence, then beer. Then silence again. It was nearly noon when Wolfe finally stirred, set aside the book he hadn't turned a page of in 45 minutes, and gestured for me to bring him the Brie container. Yes, I said, the cheese that launched a war. Bring it, he repeated. I fetched the sealed sample from the cabinet and placed it on his desk. It looked innocent enough, mottled rind, creamy center, slightly collapsed edges, harmless on the outside. Like most weapons in polite society. Wolfe leaned forward, opened the lid and sniffed. His face didn't change, but I knew that look. His mind was already working angles that had nothing to do with aroma. I have decided, he said, that the incident was not merely strategic, but reactive. Reactive to what? I asked. To discovery, he replied. Claire's initial plan may have been self-serving but non-destructive, but something changed. She discovered she was already under suspicion, or worse, already exposed. I blinked. Exposed how? Someone else found out about the Elance deal before she staged the tasting room event. That changed her plan. She added theatrics to throw off the scent, and perhaps to discredit whoever had found out. That idea planted itself fast. It explained why she'd acted so fast, why the cheese was featured, not hidden, why she invited so many eyes to the tasting. It wasn't just a trap. It was smoke cover, Wolfe continued. I had Saul pull call logs from Claire's company phone and private line. He also obtained security footage from the warehouse for the 3 days prior to the incident. He handed me a printed sheet, Saul's notes timed and annotated. On September 10th, Claire received a late-night call from a blocked number, 10 minutes long, no voicemail. On September 11th, Marcia entered Claire's office after hours and stayed for 12 minutes. She used her own key. On the same day, Claire made a single encrypted message to a personal contact at Elance Imports. Then she called in the switch to Loire et Miel. She knew someone had either seen the contract, Wolfe said, or overheard. Something. She panicked and doubled down. She chose Brie as the fall guy. It was never the plan. It was the distraction. So, Marcia? I asked. Perhaps, or Paul, or both. But one of them triggered the crisis, not with intent, but by proximity. Claire was clever, but not careful. That afternoon, Wolfe summoned Claire one final time. No gathering, no chairs for an audience. Just her and Wolfe, with me watching from the side. She entered quietly. without the polished confidence of previous visits. She knew something had shifted. "You were intercepted," Wolfe said plainly. "Before the tasting. You discovered someone. Had found out about Elance. That's why you rushed the order. Why you staged the collapse, not to frame Dennis, to create a diversion." Claire didn't deny it. She just watched him, calculating. "Who?" Wolfe asked. She exhaled through her nose. "Marcia, I left my laptop open. She saw something, I don't know how much. And you assumed she'd talk." "She's loyal to the company," Claire said, "not to me. If she told Paul or the board, my deal would have been sunk, and they would have removed me." Wolfe nodded. "So you forced their focus elsewhere." She didn't respond. "And now?" Wolfe asked. "Do you think she still holds the match?" She's silent. "Probably. Afraid. The tasting fiasco made me look reckless but sympathetic. If she speaks up now, it looks like a vendetta." "That was calculated," Wolfe said. Claire tilted her head. "So was your reveal." "You used my office to clear your board," Wolfe said. "Don't flatter yourself. This is not a victory." "Maybe not for you," she replied. She stood and turned to leave. Wolfe didn't stop her. He waited until the door closed behind her. Then he spoke to me, almost as an afterthought. "She's not finished," he said. "Not finished with what?" I asked. "With what people like her always chase," Wolfe murmured. "Control." It was nearly evening when the phone rang again. This time, it was Marcia. She sounded exhausted. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For not making me say it. That I saw the email. That I didn't say anything. That I let her do it." I didn't reply. She said, "She wins, doesn't she?" "No," I said. "She just didn't lose." Wolfe didn't comment on the call. He just stared out the window, watching nothing in particular. Later that night, he made one final note in his personal casebook, a small black ledger he only pulls out after the rare cases that leave a mark. Case closed. Justice deferred. Clarity achieved. But the cheese was never the point, and I think that was the truest thing he wrote all year. The thing about cases like this one, where the villain doesn't wear a mask and the weapon fits on a charcuterie board, is that the aftermath isn't loud. There's no siren, no gavel, no cops slamming anyone's face against a hood. What you get instead is silence. A deep, uneasy silence that settles over the brownstone like a fog that no amount of ventilation can clear. Wolfe closed his casebook the following morning, didn't open it again for 2 days. That's usually his version of mourning. Not for the victim, there wasn't one, at least not in the physical sense, but for the balance of things. Wolfe believes in order, not as a moral imperative, but as a necessity for digestion. And when someone disrupts that order with deception, however elegant, it sits in his stomach like a bad egg. For my part, I took to the street, not out of necessity. We weren't expecting any follow-up calls or lingering threats, but because the air inside had turned dense, like even the orchids had picked up the scent of disillusionment. Marcia left vassal fine imports. No public announcement, no drama. Just a short message to the board thanking them for their trust and a longer one to Claire, which Wolfe got his hands on through Saul's network. It read simply, "I saw what you did. I chose silence once, I won't again." Paul, for all his bluster, had been politically outmaneuvered. Claire's move with Elance had boosted short-term visibility, and the shareholders were buying into the innovator under siege narrative. As far as the outside world was concerned, Claire had faced sabotage and responded with resilience. Internally, no one would say it aloud, but they all knew she'd used everyone, and no one had stopped. Her Dennis stayed on, kept his head down, stopped making cash deposits. Whether he felt guilty or just lucky, I couldn't say. But he understood something now, that even if you weren't the player, you were part of the board. And the board always gets rearranged after a game like this. As for Claire, she didn't contact Wolfe again. Not to thank him, not to gloat, not even to offer another job or plea for discretion. She knew she didn't need to. The case was over. The strategy had worked. And she had walked through the fire without burning her name. Wolfe, of course, had thoughts, he always does, but he didn't share them immediately. He waited, let things ferment. He barely spoke that Friday, read 4 books in silence, and only grunted when Fritz informed him the Brie had been thrown out. It wasn't until Saturday evening during dinner, roast duck with orange glaze and precisely blanched asparagus, that he finally spoke. "She engineered the event," he said, "but not the consequences." "Which consequences?" I asked. He dabbed at his mouth. "Trust is a fragile currency. Once spent, it does not regenerate. She spent it, all of it. Seems like it was worth the price." Elance got the contract. The board didn't revolt. "She's still standing, for now," Wolfe said, "but she damaged the scaffolding beneath her, the admiration, the loyalty, the illusion of shared purpose. She rules, but alone." I thought about that. In corporate warfare, that's not a death sentence. It's just a different floor plan. "Maybe she prefers it that way," I said. "She may," Wolfe admitted, "but isolation is not triumph, it is stasis. And stasis erodes." That was his form of prophecy. Not fire and brimstone, just a slow, logical decay. He wasn't predicting her collapse, he was explaining the math. Later that night, Saul dropped by one last time to deliver a folder. It wasn't part of the case. It was a quiet epilogue, a small packet of correspondence between Claire and the Elance rep, including an unsigned draft of an exclusivity clause that Wolfe had predicted. "She's not just changing suppliers," Saul said. "She's changing the model, centralizing, cutting costs, cutting people." Wolfe nodded. "Efficiency over identity. It will please the accountants, not the artisans." "Will that matter?" "In time." Saul left, and Wolfe closed the folder without a word. The next morning, the brownstone returned to something resembling normal. Wolfe asked for his beer again. Fritz made eggs. The orchids were tended to, and I found my desk no longer felt like a stage prop from a bad drama. Still, every now and then, my mind drifted back to Claire. How she walked in here with composure. How she lied without blinking. How she had played a longer game than any of them realized until the final curtain. Wolfe once told me that truth, in the hands of the wrong person, becomes a weapon. Claire had used truth, but only as camouflage. The incident had happened. She had fainted. Dennis had looked suspicious. Marcia had seen the email. And yet, she twisted it all into a shape no one could recognize until Wolfe held it up to the light. And now no one could do anything about it. There wouldn't be an arrest, no headlines, no confessions. Just a quiet reshuffling of people and roles with Claire at the top, smiling the way winners smile when they've already walked away from the table. But Wolfe hadn't forgotten. And I hadn't either. That evening, Wolfe made a final entry in his little black ledger. I watched him write it, slow and deliberate. The cheese was bait, the illness, theater, the reveal, misdirection, the goal, control, achieved. For now. He closed the book, set it back in the drawer and rang for beer. And that was that. The brownstone had been breached, the truth had been bent, the game had ended, but the chair remained, the man remained, and so did the silence, waiting for the next knock on the door.